Muito bem, dando continuidade ao 21º Seminário de Comércio Internacional do IBRAC, nós vamos agora para o segundo painel do dia, e em que falaremos sobre defesa comercial e os exportadores brasileiros. Para isso, nós teremos a moderação do Fernando Bueno, que já está aqui conosco também. Fernando, você tem a palavra.
Thank you, René. Thank you, the audience and all the panelists. It will be a pleasure to share the floor with you. We are living difficult times in international trade arena with the increasing protectionism, the impacts of COVID-19, as we saw in the first panel, and the deadlock of the door around under the WTO. Today, we will learn if this scenario has been causing changes in the trade remedies practice in the major Brazilian trade partners, namely the EU, the US, and China. Also, are there other kind of tariff measures that may be expected in the future to affect the Brazilian exporters? Are there still opportunities to Brazilian exporters? What are the views and the role of the Brazilian trade remedy authorities? These are some questions that may be answered by, I would say, I can easily say, a dream team of trade experts today we have here. We will start with Bárbara, followed by Mr. Folkert, Poole, and Undersecretary Amanda. Bárbara, please, the floor is yours.
It is a pleasure being here. Thank you for letting me nerd out about trade remedies with you all. Let me jump right in. I would like to start by providing a general overview and then impart 3 recent developments that might impact Brazilian exporters. So first, I will talk about the impact of COVID in ITC determinations concerning causality. Second, I will address Commerce CVD investigation into currency manipulation practices. And third, I will talk about the Court of International Trade's decision regarding the deduction of Section 232 duties from export prices in dumping margin calculations. And then if we have time, I will draw your attention to the US increased enforcement in the area of forced labor and the possible risk this represents for Brazilian producers procuring Chinese parts or raw materials. As a general overview of trade remedies in the past few years, I would like to highlight that the Trump administration was a particularly active user of trade remedies, and they were not shy about it. In the first 20 months in office, Commerce initiated 200% more AD and TVD investigations than the Obama administration. Based on Biden's campaign promises and statements from his cabinet members, this is not likely to fade over the course of his administration. Also, I analyzed the numbers for the first 5 months of the Biden administration, matching with the corresponding period in the Trump administration, and they indicate that this trend will likely continue. But of course, we need more data to statistically confirm this trend. But one important distinction between Biden and Trump will be in the use of unilateral actions. Throughout this talk, I will use the term unilateral actions to refer to actions such as Section 301, Section 232, in opposition to the traditional trade remedies tools, AD, CVD, safeguards. In this realm, even though Biden has not yet taken the steps to end the Section 301 against China or the Section 232 duties on multiple countries, the current administration will likely not engage in any new probes of this kind, at least not with the same frequency or extent. Now I would like to address the topic of how COVID impacts the ITC causality analysis. I find this a fascinating topic, mostly because the COVID pandemic plays very different roles in causality analysis of original investigations and 5-year reviews. Let me explain this better. In original investigations, COVID is assessed as another known factor in the causality analysis. In general terms, whether the injury experienced by the domestic industry is explained by another factor, since the investigating authorities need to make sure the injury caused by these other factors are not being attributed to the unfairly traded imports, along the lines of Article 3.5 of the Anti-Dumping Agreement. But it is important to keep in mind that the standard applied by the ITC to find causality is not too stringent, as many of these people in the panel or in the audience might know. In an affirmative finding of causality, unfairly traded imports do not need to be the main source of injury. In fact, they do not even have to be one of the main causes of injury. The Court of Appeals of the Federal Circuit has explained that as long as the effects of the unfairly traded imports are not, and I quote, merely incidental, tangential, or trivial, causation requirement is met. Therefore, even though the COVID pandemic could complicate causation analysis in theory, because of this fairly low threshold, it is not likely that COVID effects will breach the causal link between injury and unfairly traded imports in original investigations in the US. For sunset reviews, however, COVID pandemic might actually act in the direction of facilitating the extension of the duties. The US statute governing this type of reviews directs the ITC to consider several factors in a sunset analysis, such as the likely volume, the likely price effects, commissions, prior injury determinations, any improvement in the state of the industry, and also the industry's vulnerability to material injury if an order is revoked. For most producers, the COVID pandemic represented an economic hit, which adds to the domestic industry's vulnerability to material injury in case protection from competitors in the form of AD/CVD orders are revoked. Therefore, the effect of COVID here is to weigh in favor of extending the duties. I will move on now to the topic of currency manipulation. The feud between the US and Vietnam regarding the Vietnamese currency devaluation became notorious. But just to set the right framework, it is important to note that the US was dealing with this issue using two separate tracks. First, the Section 301 investigation, which is a probe into unfair trade practice. And second, the countervailing duty investigation. So first, regarding the Section 301 probe, this investigation was initiated by the Trump administration. And during the closing days of his presidency in January, the USTR labeled Vietnamese currency actions as unreasonable and restrictive to American businesses, but did not impose any punitive tariffs. They left for the Biden administration to come up with a list of products that would guide the imposition of these punitive tariffs. And the administration was facing an imminent deadline by the governing statute. However, last month, the two countries reached an agreement and the US revoked the threat of tariffs. Second, efforts against currency manipulation of the Vietnamese currency were being fought at Commerce in the countervailing duty investigation into passenger vehicle and light truck tires. In February last year, I think many of you remember that Commerce issued a final rule on CVD investigations into currency manipulation, basically laying out how they intended to conduct this type of investigation. In June, Commerce initiated the investigation into imports of tires from Vietnam, among other countries. In November, preliminary duties were imposed after Commerce found several countervailable programs, including currency devaluation. In May this year, those duties were confirmed. So there is a lot of litigation concerning multiple issues. For example, whether WTO rules or US law permit commerce to countervail exchanges of undervalued currency, whether an exchange of currency constitutes a financial contribution, whether the currency program is specific, whether countervailing currency exchanges results in a double remedy. We don't have time to discuss all these issues, so I will focus on the specificity, which I found the most interesting. Regarding this issue, Commerce found that the subsidy was de facto specific to the group of enterprises constituting the traded goods sector. In doing so, it recognized that there were other channels of exchange involving dollar inflows, such as export of services, portfolio and direct investments, and earned income from abroad type of income that people send to their family members. But they found that the traded goods sectors was the predominant user of the subsidy because exports of goods represented the vast majority of dollar inflows. In this case, it was 72%. This is interesting because normally specificity meant targeting within the goods sector itself instead of the overall economy. But here, Commerce included non-goods users in the denominator of the calculation. And I think this is also interesting because the currency manipulation issue seems to be a poster child example of the preference of the Biden's administration for tough trade remedies enforcement while having a smaller inclination towards imposing tariffs following unilateral actions. Another recent development is the Court of International Trade's approval of Commerce's decision to deduct Section 232 duties from export prices in anti-dumping investigations, which was issued February this year. The court determined that the Section 232 duties are an import duty that can be deducted from export prices when calculating anti-dumping margins. The plaintiff in that case was arguing for the 232 duties to be considered as a trade remedy duty, which is included in the export price. This is relevant for all exporters subject to Section 232 duties, because with that interpretation, export prices are lower and dumping margins are higher. The last thing I want to share here is a heads up about the US heightened enforcement of its rules regarding forced labor and the risk this might represent to Brazilian exporters dependent on Chinese inputs. Section 307 of the Tariff Acts, and I apologize for introducing another weird acronym here, prohibits importing any product that was mined, produced, or manufactured wholly or in part by forced labor. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, enforces this prohibition. So this has been in the US laws for a long time, but historically this section is rarely used. And also when it's used, is normally used, it normally targets specific goods from specific producers. However, since 2016, China has become an increased focus of Section 307 actions. Several of them center on concerns over systemic forced labor of ethnic Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in Xinjiang. In January this year, CBP issued a region-wide withhold release order on imports of all cotton and tomato products from Xinjiang. This means that anyone intending to import one of these products will have to make the choice to re-export that product or fight the WRO order where they have to demonstrate that their product is free of forced labor in their supply chain. In June, the US added solar cells to the list. But more importantly, last month, several agencies, Commerce, State, USTR, the Department of Labor, Homeland Security, they issued an updated Xinjiang Supply Chain Business Advisory to highlight the heightened risks for businesses with supply chain and investment linked to Xinjiang. according to their words, giving the entities complicity in forced labor and other human rights abuses there and throughout China. The advisory had fairly strong language, and it indicates that the list of products will likely grow. This can impact Brazilian exporters because the WRO, the prohibitions, they encompass products that were produced in other countries, but that contain parts or raw materials targeted by these actions. I will stop here, but I'm happy to discuss more in the Q&A or in other opportunities.
Thank you, Bárbara. It's very interesting the way that the U.S. is thinking in all these issues related to trade remedies and more traditional trade remedies measures and more non-traditionals, let's say that. So let's move on to Folkert. Please, Folkert.
Yes, good morning, Fernando. Thank you. And thank you, Bárbara. And good evening, Paul. And good morning, everybody in Brazil. And thank you to IBRAC. I will start a PowerPoint because I think it's easier to follow. So just bear with me for one section and I'll try to put it on. Just a minute. Okay, hopefully you can see the screen. I will go slightly fast because I timed it and I think I might run a little over. I will first provide a short helicopter view of what I'm going to say and the background of this presentation. Then I'll provide some numbers as far as the trade defense instruments are concerned. I will then provide a summary of some generic changes in recent years and then address a number of specific changes in recent years. And then I'll address some other novelties in the EU. So the EU at the moment finds itself in the midst of economic transformation and geopolitical instability. Notably, the corona has affected all of intra-EU trade and all of extra-EU trade. And also from a political point of view, there is still a lot of aftermath from the Brexit, and there have been choices made as far as the climate change agenda is concerned. The EU has earlier this year issued a communication, and I put the reference in the slide, and it has expressed that it will continue to use the traditional trade defense instruments in a firm manner. And that is something that has really shown itself. We'll see that in a minute when we look at the numbers. We will discuss, for that matter, also the transnational subsidization, which we will find in slide 5A. And we will also see that in the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which we will see in slide 5C. The EU, other than this, has strengthened its toolbox. It has created a chief trade enforcement officer. It has enacted an enforcement regulation. It has enacted a foreign investment screening mechanism. It has designed a China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. And meantime, it is designing an anti-coercion instrument. And as I mentioned, there will be a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So by the numbers, we can also see that the EU has acted very firmly in recent years. Basically, as you look at the slide, there has been an enormous uptick in, no, not enormous, there has been an uptick in measures over the last 3 years, both in terms of measures being enforced as well as investigations being initiated. And we can also see that more respondents have brought their cases to the court as a result of the firm manner in which the EU enacts and enforces its trade defense instruments. There are more controversial issues these years than there were in the past. Changes. It's hard to say where to start, but there have been so many changes. I'll just highlight a number of the most important changes that we have undergone. The deadlines of the anti-dumping and anti-subsidy investigations have shortened. For example, the anti-dumping investigations will now last only 14 months instead of 15 in the past. Provisional measures will come after 8 months, sometimes after 7 months, but no longer after 9 months. Another important change is the pre-disclosure of calculations that we get nowadays. So 3 weeks before the provisional measures are imposed, the respondents will get the calculations in their inbox, and we will have 3 days to comment on any calculation errors. I'll skip another couple of important developments, but I'll stick to the most salient ones. Notably the RCC, or remote cross-check. This is a feature that is directly emanating from the corona crisis, which means that all the inspection visits are now being conducted online. And this has meant that the verifications last much longer than they did in the past in terms of days, although in terms of hours being online, it's shorter. Nevertheless, the homework has enormously increased, and that means that the respondents have a much more painful exercise to go through when they undergo a verification. On the upside, the verification is more easy to understand, but that does not make up for the fact that the human factor has gone, which makes this entire system of RCCs untenable in the long run. It's simply too burdensome. Final change that I should mention are the verification reports that nowadays are being made public, which is such a good thing, but there is also some downside to it. The verification reports almost always come in very late in the game, and if there is something that we do not agree with, it's very hard to challenge that kind of fact that is in the report. Plus that the verification reports almost always contain some form of facts available or BIA. Then there are a number of changes in the dumping margin calculation, in the injury margin determination, and a mini change in the union interest test. In the dumping margin determination, the most impressive or most significant change has been the new China methodology that the EU has designed. Just to recall, we all remember that the EU in the past had the cost adjustment, and the EU in the past had the China methodology. Both these methods have basically vaporized, but in the place of that has come a new normal value calculation methodology, which is the now infamous Article 26A, which speaks about the existence of significant distortions. Now, this method on its face is country neutral, so in theory it could be used against anybody, but in practice this method is used for 95% of the time against China and maybe 4% of the time against Russia. The method is somewhat complicated to explain in 3 seconds, but most easily we could understand it as a mixture between the old non-market economy method that the EU deployed, the previous cost adjustments that the EU in the past deployed, and a kind of misapplication of the particular market situation provision, potentially cocktailed with some misinspiration originating from the protocol of accession. Bottom line, nobody knows where this provision fits exactly. There is no equivalent in the anti-dumping agreement or in GATT 1994, but it makes for an interesting experience, to put it mildly. I have devoted some slides to this method in detail, but I believe it might go too far to explain everything in detail. Basically, the provision Article 26A is a lengthy provision. It's an ambiguous provision. It contains a broad scope of elements that may determine distortion in the country that is selected by the EU. And it gives wide discretion to the EU to select a representative country to substitute the normal value from the targeted country. The procedure, I will grant you this, but when you later on have time to look at the slide, this is a summary of the procedure. The most salient feature is the country report that the Commission has drawn up, and that is in my next slide. The Commission until now has drawn up 2 country reports, one against China and one about Russia. These reports are enormous, 400 plus pages. In the case of China, even more than 460 pages. And these are the sources of distortions that the Commission mentions in its own report. And other sources of distortion can then be supplied also by applicants. The applicants, when filing a complaint, can then use the report of the Commission to complain about the distortions in the selected country, in most cases China, and the Commission in its own investigation then proves the existence of those distortions based on its own report. The exporting producers and the foreign government can then prove, are then allowed to prove that distortions do not exist, and that proof has to come either at the company level or the provincial or the country level. Nevertheless, this whole method is ambiguous, and in fact, the provision conflates a number of legal concepts, and there is not even a threshold for the existence of significant distortions mentioned in the provision itself. All in all, this leads to a replacement of cost of the producer in question, and it is very unlikely that individual company data are being used in the calculation. So in the end of the day, this is basically the continuation of the old non-market economy method with some changes. If this method ever comes to a head in the WTO, it is possible that the EU may invoke the PMS provision as one of its defenses, but nevertheless, that will not save the EU. The EU may also invoke the protocol, and the legal community in Brussels is convinced that even that will not save the EU. As a bottom line, everybody is of the opinion that WTO violations may very likely remain inevitable. And people have compared the new method as a car with 3 wheels. So that is enough about the dumping margin. On the injury margin, there's also something new. In the EU, in the past, the injury margin was sort of automatic, and this is no longer so. If there is a complaint about a single raw material that accounts for more than 17% of the cost, and if that is then in the interest of the EU, it can be decided to not apply the injury margin. So that's the first big change. And the second change is that when the injury margin is still applied, there are still a number of new calculation rules. Notably, the target profit has been fixed at a minimum of 6%, and another number of costs are being included in the EU's industry cost of production, such as costs that are incurred on account of the multilateral environmental agreements, ILO conventions, and also future costs that may incur for the duration of the measures. So all in all, this will lead to higher injury margins compared to what was incurred into the past. The union interest test has also undergone a slight modification. It's not really earth-shattering. Then what is more interesting probably are the other novelties that the EU has designed. So we have 2 major ones, which is notably the transnational subsidies and the CBAM. So on the transnational subsidy side, the EU has been quite creative in applying the currently existing countervailing duty instrument, or anti-subsidy instrument as it is called in the EU, against foreign direct investment in third countries. For the moment, this has only applied against foreign direct investment coming out of China, going into a third country, notably Egypt. And this has been until now only the case for 2 proceedings. But the EU has also designed a legal instrument whereby in the future it can also counter a number of subsidies that distort the internal market, most notably a regulation that is now nearly final and which is in its final stages. And the last stage will be in October of this year, and then soon after it will become a law. So this regulation contains a mechanism, first of all, to review distortions caused by foreign subsidies that are granted to companies in the EU. Second of all, that regulation will contain a notification mechanism, which will, before it happens, review any proposed investment or acquisition in the EU that is facilitated by foreign subsidies. And certainly this regulation contains a module whereby there is a mechanism that notifies the contracting authority if the contributions for the public procurement tender are received from non-EU countries which contain a subsidy element. Notably, this whole transnational subsidy countervailing or addressing is mainly aimed at subsidies that come from China and which the EU considers to be distorting the internal market. Then, as far as currency devaluation is concerned, the EU does not have this instrument yet, and let's hope it doesn't get it. And finally, the carbon border adjustment mechanism is something that we will all be facing in some day in the not that far away future. So this is something new that was introduced this summer. Basically, it's an externalization of the previously existing ETS system in the EU. So the CBAM, as it is abbreviated, addresses greenhouse emissions that are embedded in certain goods, and upon their importation in the EU, these products can not enter unless the requirements provided in the proposal are fulfilled. So the products that are going to be targeted by this CBAM proposal are notably cement, electricity, fertilizer, iron, steel, and aluminum. Other products may follow later. This CBAM applies to imports from all countries, and agreements may be concluded with countries to exempt them from CBAM if those countries have certain equivalent carbon pricing mechanisms. The Commission is the authority that applies and enforces CBAM and will be the central administrator that maintains a database on the certificates, and it will assist member states to coordinate the activities. The CBAM will also allow member states to designate competent authorities to execute the obligations. And since this whole proposal is still in the preparatory stage, parties can still comment until 14 September. That is pretty soon, actually. Now, when will this start? The transitional phase is scheduled to start on 1 January and last 1 January of 23 and last until 31 December of 25. And during that period, only the administrative and reporting obligations apply. The importers need to monitor and report emissions of imported products and must provide quarterly reports to the authorities. The data that are so collected will become the basis for the calculation of the CBAM certificates. Then the final phase that will start on 1 January 26 and will last until we don't know when, will actually require that an importer has the appropriate amount of certificates in its hand, and he has to buy them beforehand when he imports a product of the 5 categories that I just mentioned. So the importer must purchase those products and give those certificates to the authority. And basically, just to give an example, this is going to be a costly affair for everybody. And CBAM certificate will cost about 42 euro per ton of steel. That is just one example. So if you import thousands of millions of tons of steel. That is going to be a lot of money. Now, the surveillance obligations and compliance obligations are also contained in the proposal, and the failure to surrender the CBAM certificates will lead to liabilities in terms of penalties and criminal sanctions. Plus, if there are incorrect declarations, or if you fail to make declarations at all, then that will lead to the application of best information available, a notion that we all know from the anti-dumping instrument, and that will be used to claim additional CBAM certificates from the declarants. Okay, now this was my short presentation. Thank you very much, IBRAC and Brazil. I have also provided a two annexes with the new methodology cases, or a summary of those cases. And let's see if I can get the video back on. Yes, maybe it worked. That is the summary of my presentation, and I look forward to any questions that may have arisen. And thank you again, everybody. Thank you, IBRAC, and thank you, Fernando, for inviting me here today.
Thank you, Folkert, to share your knowledge with us. There are a lot of novelties in Europe, of course. I would highlight some more related to the more traditional trade remedies, and thinking on Brazilian exporters, which is the lesser duty rule that is not automatic anymore, which is not a good news for us. And the price undertaking, I'm not sure how is in the past, but it seems that it will be more tough to get a price undertaking. Even the Mercosur-EU agreement, there is a provision there that there will be, let's say, goodwill to analyze price undertaking proposals. So let's see if it works, how it works in the future. And now passing the floor to Pooh. I would say that everybody is anxious to hear Pooh, because I think we work more here nowadays with the EU and the US, but in the future, it seems that we work more with China, because Pooh can say more for us. Please, Pooh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for asking me to join this seminar. I'm not sure that China will be, at least currently, that will be important for Brazilian exporters. In fact, that when Fernando asked me whether I'm interested to participate in this seminar, in the very beginning, I was very happy. On the second thought, I said, what am I going to talk about? And China is a frequent target of trade remedy investigations, mostly by US, EU, Canada, South Asian countries, including Latin American countries. And on hearing what Bárbara and Folkert views on the new trade policies and new developments, I start to be a little bit wondering whether I made a correct decision to be here. Because it seems all the policy formulated by the US, in particular the EU, are basically targeted on the Chinese exporters. And being a country being investigated by many other countries, I don't know, how China, or what can I offer my views to our colleagues in Brazil, and whether China is making new rules, or China is making changes some certain trade policies. I'm not sure. I think at this moment, China is in a position in responding to various trade measures taken or imposed by United States. And also China is busy with handling the issues, the trade matters, imposed by the EU. We are in a very difficult situation. And broadly speaking, I think everybody perhaps could share my views is that the President Biden basically continued the policies adopted by the former President Trump. There are some aspects changed in that President Biden tried to rebuild the airlines and tried to rebuild a new front line and tried to pave a very substantial solid ground for me.
Okay, we'll try to reconnect Pooh, but meanwhile, I think we can, if Amanda, Undersecretary Amanda, if you could make your presentation and views, would be great for us.
Definitely. I don't know if Pooh has just joined again. No, okay. So I will take the floor now, and I'll share my screen while we have Pooh with us again. So firstly, I would like to thank IBRAC on behalf of the Undersecretariat of Trade Remedies and Public Interest for the invitation to join this event. Fernando, I would like to thank you and Renee as well for inviting. It's been quite a long time I've been joining IBRAC seminars. It's quite, I'm quite a fan of those seminars. And I was thinking about my first international trade IBRAC in 2019, where we were in a room with more than 300 people there. And hopefully next year we will be able to have these seminar in that manner as well. I'd like to thank my co-panelists for their previous presentations. Bárbara, colleague from Brazil. It's very, very nice to have you, to be here with you. Folkert and Pooh as well, thank you for your presentations. Hopefully we will be happy, we'll have Pooh back again. So what I would like here is to highlight some of our recent developments on the exporter support on trade remedies investigations. So it's I am really enthusiastic of this panel, because generally when I join events, it's about our current trade remedies investigations, about our anti-dumping, CVD, or safeguard investigations, or it is related to what we use as the public interest analysis. Although that we generally don't have so much interest on the export, on our export support activities, which are one of the most important agendas of our Undersecretariat. I generally say that this is our consensus positive agenda. There are no fields in Brazilian industry that would understand that we are acting wrongly, because of course we are representing the government, the Brazilian government position that would in the end of the day benefit those companies. I think the only ones that wouldn't be happy with us would be the domestic industry on the exporter country, but then that's it, that's life. So I would like to present to you some of our understanding about what are our activities in this field. So first of all, regarding our system, what we consider a triple system, who makes our team in this system of Brazilian exporter support and trade remedies. So here we are in the Ministry of Economy and the Secretariat of International Affairs International Trade Affairs within our Undersecretariat of Trade Remedies and Public Interest. But alongside with us, we have a couple of very strong partners, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Brazil as well, alongside with the local embassies. So the three of those entities of the government body, we work together on a daily basis. So as we have a communication with Brazilian exporters, lawyers, consultants, we coordinate with other government agencies when we have investigations that need information from other fields. We have communication with local investigating authorities. For instance, if there is a CPG investigation, it provides an investigation about laws about a city, where we have to have this contact with the local authorities as well. Then we have our work to draft those legal documents representing the position of the Brazilian government. And it's interesting to note that we, as a government, we do not represent the companies themselves. They would have their own representation, legal and economic representation, and the investigations, and we present our views regarding the legal grounds about that investigation, if it follows the multilateral agreements. And finally, we have active participation in those investigations. We participate in hearings, we join the case briefs. So we have a very, very active participation, and I will show you some of our recent achievements in this field as well. So taking the understanding that this is a central part of our work here in the Undersecretary, we consider it appropriate to have transparency of our activities. So it doesn't matter how big or small the exporter might be, it may have the same treatment for the Brazilian government. So when we decided to publish these guidelines that presents some of the basic concepts. What is this triad system of Brazilian exporter team here for trade remedies? What would be the steps of the investigation, so as the Brazilian exporters would understand more what they are facing when they're joining a EU or US or China or Argentina or any other investigation abroad. If you would like, there is the QR code that you can download, but if you go on Google, you can definitely just type a guide on Brazilian export on trade remedies and you find it. And I'm happy to say that we are on our way to translate that as well to English. And I hope, and hopefully in a short run, we'll be able to publish it in English as well. So what are the statistics here regarding trade remedies in force with impact on the Brazilian exports? So I will, in this topic, understand what is currently impacting. So most of the cases that impact Brazilian exports on trade remedies applied are anti-dumping cases. So almost 60% of our cases are anti-dumping cases applicable to Brazilian exporters. Also, we have safeguards that applied. And here I would like to make a disclaimer saying that this statistic is about what we call relevant safeguards. So when we take the database of the WTO, it presents a number much bigger than this one, but we considered those 23 safeguards with an internal methodology, taking into account either the actual or the potential impact on the Brazilian exports. So either we consider that Brazil has already a relevant flow of trade And then we have interest. There are some companies that have interest in participating in those investigations. Also, we would have some cases where although there is no trade flow, we have some potential special interest, either because of the product, either because of the discussions that are taken into in those investigations. But we also have some measures about other measures, subsidies and countervailing duties, and those unilateral or non-traditional measures that also impact on Brazilian exports as well. And I will dig into those numbers a bit more. So when we consider the countries, and it's interesting to have this panel because we have some of the stars of this field abroad as well. So when we consider countries, out of those 73 measures that we consider to be enforced against Brazilian exports, we can see that the United States is our top the top country that applies measures against Brazil with 27% of all measures. We are followed by Argentina, our neighbor country, and then we have Turkey, Canada, India, Ukraine, Mexico, and some other countries. What I consider it very interesting is to go a bit deeper on that info. So when we have a specific understanding about anti-dumping measures, we have a clear understanding that Argentina then takes the lead. Argentina is the country which most have anti-dumping measures against Brazil. And then the US takes the second position, and it has 11 measures, anti-dumping measures against Brazil. And then we have Canada and India as well, but mostly we have Argentina and the US as the countries with the largest numbers of anti-dumping cases. This is interesting because this changes a bit when we consider safeguard measures. So when we have safeguards, we have Ukraine, we have Turkey, we have Morocco, we have India and Indonesia as other countries that have safeguard measures that apply to Brazilian exports. And once again, I make this caveat information that this presents our relevant safeguard. It does not mean that those countries have those measures that actually have impact on Brazilian exports, but it would bring at least our special interest. It's interesting to know, to realize that we have other countries that use safeguards, and it presents and somehow it follows the trend provided by the WTO statistics, where safeguards around the world are increasingly being used by new users of trade remedies. And finally, when we have understanding about countervailing measures and other types of those measures, those non-traditional measures, we have, for instance, we have USA as the leader. So all our countervailing duties, all the countervailing duties applied and enforced against Brazil are applied by the US. We have impact with the US Section 232 as well in the Brazilian exports. When we consider sectors, it is the numbers, they show that all those measures, they apply generally and most target on steel products. And this represents a trend abroad as well. And we definitely can discuss a bit more about these follow-on investigations about steel products as well. But also it is interesting to know that paper in Brazil also is a target, as a sector target by the trade remedies, investigations, and measures enforced around the world. Then coming to the third topic, what is our work nowadays? What is our team here in Brazil working on? So we have currently 25 investigations in course where we are actively working and presenting information. So, or at least we are making a research internally if we have trade flow that would need our participation as the government. So this is a topic that generally we don't have so much discussions, but definitely it takes a lot of our time as undersecretary, and we consider it a very central activity in our work because it has a very positive impact on the Brazilian exports. So some of the main current investigations that we are actively working. So regarding the US, there is the anti-dumping investigation on raw honey that we have been joining meetings and presenting comments, written comments. There is the CVD review on cold rolled steel that we are also very active. There are the safeguards on steel, and it's a review. And since, because of the Brexit, now we are joining both review cases. With the EU and the UK, we have been having consultations with both regarding this current investigation. And finally, considering Argentina, we have two anti-dumping investigations that we've been joining in the review sunset review investigation that affects multiprocessors and also ceramic and cemetery fixtures. Well, and I've been saying about many numbers, what we've been doing, but you may ask me, okay, Amanda, but what have you achieved so far? It's good to have work to do, but it's good to have some accomplishments as well. And I would say definitely we're aiming to have many accomplishments to celebrate as a Brazilian government, as well, of course, for the Brazilian exporters. And we have on our web page many of those, and I would like to highlight some of them. So an investigation in Colombia about safeguards on paperboard. We presented our legal comments as well. I obviously would have to say that it's not only the Brazilian government that makes this those results, those achievements to end up as a positive achievement, because of course the company has to cooperate and has have a good consultation on legal team to provide that information as well. But as a Brazilian system of exporter support on those trade remedies, we actively worked on that as well. And finally, in that case, there were no measure applied, and mainly for some of the arguments that were presented by us as Brazil government and Brazilian companies investigated. Another recent achievement that we were very happy is that Peru decided on a new investigation on textiles. They decided finally not to apply any measure as well against Brazilian exports. Also, something that was we were really very happy because it took a lot of our effort, and I am sure Barbara knows how difficult it is to join a CVD case in the US, and finally the US decided not to apply any measure against a CVD investigation on aluminum sheets. So we were really very happy with that. And to highlight how important it is for us to have the multilateral system applied in a proper manner, Brazil in 2021 decided to suspend concessions on imports of Costa Rica because of the what we consider the non-compliant application about the safeguard on sugar. And it was the first time that Brazil took this position in the history. So these are my thoughts that I would like to share with you. And I would like to take your attention as well that these guidelines that I mentioned is followed by some others where we try to present these transparency, these predictability, and the legal certainty that we aim about to have on our investigations on trade remedies and public interest. So we have the guidelines on anti-dumping investigations. We also have the guidelines on public interest evaluations, and also recently, just a few weeks ago, we published a new guideline on our new electronic administrative process that all parties, not only the Brazilians, of course, but the exporters, the importers, the governments abroad, they may participate. It is very user-friendly, and I would definitely suggest all of you to take a look on those guidelines. And in a short run, hopefully, we will have all of them in English as well. So thank you very much, and I would like to thank that on behalf of the Undersecretary of the Undersecretariat Export Support Team. Definitely, all those statistics, numbers, and results are not achieved by me, but my team. So I'd like to thank Fabio, Zara, Miriam, and Joan specifically, because they are the ones who make those comments on those investigations, as well as Victor, that recently left our team to do his PhD in the US, but he's definitely a team member important to us. So thank you to all of you. Hopefully we can have more discussions, and thank you once again.
Thank you, Amanda, and congratulations for the work that you and your team is doing in the Undersecretariat. It's in these investigations, the export side for Brazil, I would say, and I have some past experience, the Brazilian government can make the difference and can be a game changer on the final result. And as you said, and as you showed, you did it sometimes. It's not easy, but it can be a game changer. So thank you and congratulations again. Pooh is back. Pooh, you have the floor again, and thank you for staying, okay?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. Perhaps the internet didn't share my views. All of a sudden, then I was cut off. Where was I don't know where I was cut off, disconnected. I think I'm talking about the WTO, the overall trade policies, and what China is doing. I think basically China is responding to the measures or trade policies adopted by the US, as well as the new changed trade policies and investigation methodologies adopted by the EU. You can hear from what the Folkert talk about, that the so-called 70% of raw materials no less duty rule, significant market distortions, and transnational boundaries of subsidies, or the EU internal market subsidies, provided by the foreign governments, etc., etc. I think that's more clearly targeted China. So I don't think that China basically is a newcomer in WTO, and China has built up many of trade laws, regulations. Over the last 20 years, I think China joined the WTO in 2001. The China trade policies in terms of trade investigations, trade remedy investigations, have remained unchanged. And you can see the Chinese regulations, anti-dumping subsidies or safeguard, they always put still provisional regulation. So the provisional regulation that was adopted in 2001, 2002, 2003, until now is still provisional. But in fact, that China is going to change its trade policies and is going to think how to make new rules, incorporating the new factors, new elements within the context of a changing international trade policies. I can share some of the statistics with you. So just roughly prepared statistics. I'm not going as far as 2001, the year China joined the WTO, just started from 2016 until today. So you can see that China initiated anti-dumping investigation in total 120 and the CVD 13 and safeguard 1. So the MOFCOM is the authority responsible for trade remedy investigations. And among all those 134 cases, so original investigations are 75. There are sunset reviews, 59. And the 80 anti-dumping is 120, CVD 13, safeguard 1. So you can see China is not a country that frequently use safeguard measures as a trade remedy investigation. If we compare the anti-dumping investigation, China is not also very often using the CVD investigation. I think that's the reason, because mostly the CVD investigation concerns the EU or developed members of the WTO, not the developing countries, for very clear reasons, because all those developing countries, they do have also subsidies provided by the government. You can see from the EU subsidy cases initiated against other countries, and also the subsidy cases investigated by the United States. So it's not only the developing countries, but also developed countries. But China, when you use the CVD, is much more moderate vis-a-vis the developing countries. But overall, compared to the anti-dumping investigations, there are not many numbers of CVD cases initiated by the MOFCOM. And I realize there's a Chinese beneath in this slide, but this is the statistics concerning which country remains the top among the trade remedy investigations initiated by the MOFCOM. The number 136 among all those countries, United States, and second, Japan, third, EU, fourth, Korea, followed by India and China, Taiwan, Australia 4, Thailand 4, Singapore 4, Brazil 1. So you see, China is very lenient towards the Brazilian exporters. Over the last 6 years, we only initiated 5 years, we only initiated one case against Brazil. But if I look at the cases initiated by the Brazil government, whoa, that's incomparable. But the products involved mostly chemicals or textile, and also some other products, but not many steel products. You can see those countries in India, Malaysia, Australia, because of the recent 2 cases. So all of a sudden, it's just jump from 2 cases up to 4 cases. But United States 36, the figure shows the trade relations between these 2 countries are quite big. In the anti-dumping investigation, if you look at the other side, from other perspective, that means the trade relationships are quite developing very strongly. There are need between the 2 countries. If you look at Malaysia, number 5, there are only 5 cases, and Brazil 1. What does that mean? That means the trade volume between China and Brazil, and between Russia and South Africa, this all one cases over the last 5 years, that means the trade volume is not big. So anti-dumping from one side, what is unfair trade practices by the exporting country or exporters. But if you look at it from another perspective, that means the trade volume between the two sides are quite big. Let me show you another slide. So over the last 5 years, we can see that there are number of cases that China let the measure expired, make up 14%. And the 7 cases terminated without imposition of measures. So the 74% of the cases are still in force. So in other words, that China does not maintain the measures beyond the 5-year period. If you look at those figures, okay, there are a number of cases being terminated without the measures, and in many cases, when it comes to the sunset review, mostly MOFCOM just simply let the measure go, okay, without renewing the measures for another 5-year period. There are some, but not many, but certainly not beyond 15 or 3 times of a sunset review, beyond the 10 years. Because I remember that in the early time during the Doha round, one of China's proposal to modify the Article 11 of ADA, in that the anti-dumping measure shall remain maximum 10 years. And after the second round of a sunset review, the measure shall be expired. That's the proposal. So I think China, still based on that type of thinking, just would not like to continue to maintain the measures beyond 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. If you look at the EU cases against the bicycles from China, is already more than 25 years. So it's a very, very long period of a measure in force. But I just give you a very simple picture about how many cases the MOFCOM initiated over the 5 years, and which countries rank the number 1 in terms of trade remedies targeted by China, and also how those measures being implemented by MOFCOM. If we talk about whether there are new trade policies or new development, my answer to that is a very simple no. But I can tell you, MOFCOM is seriously thinking how to modify, restructure the whole package of trade remedy measures or the regulations. One of the, for example, the regulations that MOFCOM is thinking to change is the newcomer review. And China still at the moment is a country exported oriented. There are not many, developing countries can export to China. For reasons I don't need to elaborate. But the trade policy that China, if I say something that the MOFCOM is using, is that I can use a Chinese saying that we are using the knife designed by you yourself to fight back. In other words, if a country initiated a trade measures or investigation against Chinese exporters, for example, India or Brazil, just take example, market economy, non-market economy, and China perhaps will use the same methodology, use the same policy, the same reasoning, the same justification used by the foreign investigation authorities. For example, Brazil, the China will also in this case said, okay, this sector is not a market economy. I think Bárbara perhaps knows or is aware. There's a recent case that the MOFCOM initiated against the US exporter that China used a non-market economy. type of methodology. So the dumping margin, I think, is about 150%, which doesn't make economic sense at all. You know, any of exporters, if have that margin, will just gone bust. You know, that the bankrupt already. So that's really, you can see that there are certain trade, you know, fightings between the United States and China. But I also draw attention of Brazilian exporters, also the Brazilian authorities. If the trade policy continues to use like today, treating China in certain sectors as a non-market economy, and maybe MOFCOM, I'm not sure, maybe MOFCOM will follow the same methodologies, because if we look at the WTO panel or appellate body rulings, when they talk about a CVD, when they talk about a public body, when they talk about the particular market situation, they are focusing on the function of government. They are not focusing on the structure as a whole. So that's different. So if you look at all those cases related to the Argentina and also E4 paper, the Indonesia and Australia, and examples are also about in all those cases dealing with Article 2, you know, 0.211 ADA and also Article 2.2 particular market situation, or relating to the determination of a normal value. Margin. But if you look at those rulings, if you look at the analysis and the reasoning provided by the panel and the appellate body, they are only focusing on the function. They're not talking about the structure, the economy structure as a whole. So I think that's the conclude my views on China. I'm sorry that I cannot bring you new development, new policy. There are no, but I can tell you that China is good against Chinese exporters, that same knife designed by you. At that moment, you will not say, China, you are wrong. The China will say, okay, that's the knife, the weapon you designed. So we follow the same methodology, the practice that is used by you against Chinese exporters. So my advice to the Brazilian exporters, just watch the China's new trade policy. They are making the changes. They try to make changes in response to the changing of the international trade. And also the Chinese authorities maybe is going to use the same methodologies that the Brazilian government used against Chinese exporters. I conclude on my views on the topic related to China. I cannot, give you as many inside views like Bárbara gave, and also the Folkert gave, although I involve in many cases, United States and the EU, including RTC. So I know those new trade policies are very interesting, in fact, but from China side, it's not many new development. So Fernando,
Thank you, Paul. Yeah. Thank you for the thank you for the insights. Unfortunately, we will not have a Q&A section because we are running out of time for the next panel. But I encourage the audience to send questions by mail to me or to IBRAC. We can forward to our panelists. So thank you everyone again. And thank you for sharing all the knowledge and the insights. It's very important for even for the trade community here in Brazil, and for, of course, the exporters. Thank you all.